morning, everybody. Glad to be with you this Saturday morning. My name is Ed Samuel. I'm a career coach with a firm called Sam Nova. We're based in Kennett Square, PA, and serve clients in greater Philadelphia area and across the U.S. You know, on my last program 2 weeks ago, I launched a discussion about my initial thoughts on actions to take, the do's and don'ts related to your job search right in the midst of this current COVID-19 crisis that we're in. And the good news is I heard from many of you that it struck a practical chord, and that was really good to hear. And others since then, in these last 10 days, have asked me to touch on some additional points, maybe provide an update, and maybe hit on some new to-dos. And so I plan to do that this morning. These are just very unique times. So let's start with, some high level again, is the timing of all this. And we certainly are going to be through, dealing with this in a big way through the month of April. Some people say by mid-May, end of May, and then depending on who you talk to, much longer. And certain firms are going to be affected short term. Certain firms will be affected much longer. And unfortunately, maybe some of the smaller firms might even go out of business because of this. But for many of you, once we get out of this, then we can get back to work. But in the meantime, we have to deal with what we're dealing with. So your information is as good as mine in terms of the timing. But, last time I spoke about it, and I still need to talk about it because, it's a job search state of mind that people are in right now, is very important. And those of you who know me know that I tend to be an optimist all the time, but I'm just as much of an optimist now as I've ever been in terms of we're going to get out of this thing. It may not be fast, but we will get out of this. And there's a couple of places for you to be at. One is, hey, let's move your job search forward, your career forward, what you want to do for it. Think it through now, and be as assertive as you possibly can. The other extreme people are, talking to me about is, hey, Ed, I'm just going to sit tight and not do anything until this thing ends. And I'm a big fan of, of not doing that. I'm a big fan of not going into freeze mode, because here's what happens. If you go into freeze mode and not do anything until this starts to get better, you're kind of starting from your job search at a cold start, and you're just going to be further behind than the rest who are pushing and talking to people, in a big way now. And there might be, quite a few of you who are going to play the middle, and you go from one side to the other. But, the middle, I guess, is an okay compromise, perhaps, but I'm still not a fan of even the middle. I'm a fan of continuing to reach out. I'm going to talk about some of the things that I think you should be doing. But this is, there's nothing easy here. This is all hard stuff. There's no quick and easy. And if you're looking for quick and easy, this ain't the time. But your job search state of mind is very important. And so I'm a big fan of stay on that offensive position by reaching out, talking to people, applying for jobs. And so the other thing I spoke about on the last program was, there are industries that are still hiring. There are industries in the defensive side of things that I used the word on last time: food production, chemical, manufacturers. There's consumer goods, things that you go into the grocery store even today to buy. Those companies still have to go on. Of course, everything touching healthcare at some capacity, they're in need of support. And that's certainly an arena where, if you're applying for a job or searching out an industry to go after, that could be one. Those industries tend to be hiring that industry. Insurance, telecommunications, technology. I'll speak further about that a little bit later. And certainly, these firms are hiring. And you're going to stay away from other industries that might be more retail oriented, entertainment, and the like are places that you may not want to be pursuing right at the moment. But even for the non-defensive industries, if there's critical openings, they could also be, looking to hire. But if you were to balance your time out, I'm a big fan of let's move towards more of the defensive industries if you have the choice of pursuing something right at the moment, whether it be the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or longer. Now, here's some of the good news. Since I spoke on the radio last to you, I've known, I have talked to dozens of people where people have landed jobs in the last 10 days alone. So if you think that, all is lost, well, these people are landing jobs in the midst of what's going on because they're part of those defensive industries I just mentioned. One person, in fact, sent me an email this morning, and I was quite, pleased to see. Hey, Ed, I started my job on Monday. He had gotten a job offer, I guess, 8 days ago, and his job was on hold, waiting a background check. Well, the background check company, they're frozen like all the other companies are, and they basically waived their background check process in some way simply because they may not be up for months and they couldn't afford to have this person, and this happens to be my client, wait any longer. So that person's off and working. So it's nice to see that companies are hiring, and they're even waiving some of their existing procedures. Have another client in New York City land a job, and he tapped into the hidden job market, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But the hidden job market is one where you're reaching out to people that you don't know, and you're tapping into something where there might be a need. And sure enough, he did. 2 days later, he's on an interview, and within 48 hours, he gets a phone call. Can you come in to help us for over a 13-week period to do some contracting work? Another person was a CFO, offered a perm role, and everything looked good. And that person was converted to should I say converted, was asked to, hey, until this thing settles, can you come in as a contractor? And of course, the person said yes, and wanted to move forward. And yet another person started as a recruiter to help a technology company in Philadelphia. So yeah, this is all happening in the midst of COVID-19. So when people say I'm just going to go in hold mode, I just beg to differ that there are people literally hiring and giving out job offers in the midst of this because these positions have to be filled. There's a part of America, the part of who we are that we have to continue to move forward. And if you could be the candidate, then you're going to get hired in the midst of this. And remember, firms also cannot afford just to stop hiring for critical positions when we come out of this. So those firms that, are not, interviewing for positions, that they need to fill, 3, 4, 5 months from now, they're also going to be in a worse way if they think they're going to start from a cold start. So I just want, to let everybody listening that in spite of the fact that a lot of people are losing jobs, there are some people who are also being hired. Thus, don't put everything on hold. Now, the other thing that I've seen in the last 7 days, especially, and I look for the new job postings, look for jobs that are being posted literally in the last 7 days. Now, one has to make a presumption that companies that are posting new positions in the midst of all this, there might be a legitimate need. I pray to goodness there has to be a legitimate need, or why the heck would you be posting now? And that's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing, and but look for those new postings. Now, positions that were posted and part of the, that weren't part of the defensive, one of those defensive industries, 30 days ago, 45 days ago, even those jobs that you've applied for, some of those jobs can be put on hold. You may not be hearing back from some of those firms, but the new postings, you again would pray that those companies would not be posting things if there wasn't a true immediate need. So I would encourage you to pursue those firms that are hiring. Now, here's another topic: recruiters. Recruiters, I've seen some movement with recruiters of late. So here's a couple things. Recruiters who have real and immediate positions to fill that are related to these defensive markets, I've seen those recruiters push and look for candidates within the last 7 to 10 days. And if they find those candidates, they're going to get job offers because those needs are real and they're recruiting real time. Now, there are other recruiters, whether they be contingency recruiters or retained recruiters or big named retained recruiters. They're also, posting positions, having discussions, but they're being pretty upfront saying, a big part of our work is on hold, but the critical ones we're still interviewing for. And I've heard the word they're stacking up a pipeline or creating a pipeline of candidates so that when this thing lifts, you could be the first in line because you've spent the time talking to the recruiter. And I would, urge you to be right up front with a recruiter. Is this real or is this not real in terms of the timing? Or, just ask them outright, am I in the pipeline or is this something that is immediate? Don't not ask the question. But my main point here is there's some good news in terms of what I see. Some of the recruiters who are actively recruiting seem to be real deeds. Now, the last point from my last program, which I want to hit on, had to do with flexibility. And some of you, many of you may want, your next role to be a perm role during, right now. And you may even want, a very specific thing to do. And you may only want to be 20 minutes from home. But you might need to shift your thinking a bit more and be open to contract work, which might turn to a perm role. And maybe not be so focused on what you have traditionally done. Be more focused on what might be needed by that firm now. And if there's a path, if there's a connection between what you've done and how you want to optimize your career down the road, maybe there's some rationale of shifting into doing something new at this point. And maybe, unfortunately, that role may not be 20 minutes from the house and that you're going to have to give some things up. And look, I work with hundreds and hundreds of people. Some people can financially wait it out, and that's great if they can. But others who can't wait it out, this area of flexibility becomes even more important. And those firms that are in a crisis mode, they might need help, and they might need it fast. And I think the people that are going to be more flexible right now might be of more interest to those firms that have a need. So now here's a couple of other areas I want to touch on. LinkedIn would be one. And, for those of you, who have a LinkedIn profile, I'm not suggesting you need to make any big, bold changes. But one thing I would call out is that, up near the top of your LinkedIn profile, you have the opportunity to actually let people know that you're open to new job opportunities. And I encourage you to make sure that you've clicked that button, especially if you're unemployed and you're looking for a job. Make sure people know that you're open to job opportunities and fill out all the information that you're asked to fill out there. Specifically, if you're looking for a perm role, they also give the option to add a contract work as well. So you might want to take a look at that particular field. If you're open to new opportunities to the public, and that's kind of a choice you have recruiters or public. If you make it public, or if you only want recruiters to see, just make sure you change the wording from perm to perm and contract to let people know that you really are open to contract work. And that's assuming that you are, or you want to be for that area of flexibility. So you kind of take that question off the table, especially in this short-term mode that we're in right now. The other thing that I see happening too is that a lot of people are at home. Some people have been laid off. Some people are now doing some volunteer work, which I think is just an amazing, wonderful thing to see people do. Some people are helping the healthcare workers, the nurses, the hospitals, some of the food banks, some of the churches that are giving out food. And I think this is a great opportunity. If you're helping in some vein there, make sure you add that volunteer work to your resume. make sure you add that volunteer work specifically to your LinkedIn page, so people know that you're stepping up and you're playing that role. I'm a big fan of it. In my recent book that I published, I devote a section on volunteering and how important it is that people see, where your heart's at outside of work. So get it on your LinkedIn profile. I'm not a fan of leaving volunteer work off LinkedIn. Now, the other area I want to touch on is video interviewing, because that's just taken off. Video interviewing was growing at one level up until the crisis, but now it's kind of taken shape, and where a good portion of the interviews have shifted to video interviewing, where you're in front of your laptop, desktop, and they're filming you, you're seeing them, they're seeing you, and it may continue that way. But here's a couple of tips, and I could spend 30 minutes on this alone. But make sure you set up and prepare. Never go into an interview cold. Make sure if they tell you that it's going to be on Zoom, test Zoom with somebody. If it's GoToMeeting, test GoToMeeting with someone. If it's free conference call, test free conference call. If it's WebEx, whatever the application of choice, make sure that you've loaded it and you've tested it with somebody real time. Don't wait till the morning of the interview, ever. And I use all these applications, but even I had a problem with one of them yesterday, and I had to uninstall it and then reinstall it to get it working again. You just don't want that type of snafu to occur prior to an interview. You also get a feel for the tools and how to use the chat window to how you look but so here are some other tidbits on video interviewing. Make sure it's quiet. Keep the dogs in another part of the house. Make sure your cell phone's off. Your wife, your spouse, your kids' cell phones are in quiet mode. Significant other, quiet mode. Try to make sure where you're sitting. I'm a big fan of it, keeping it pretty dull, in terms of a dull white wall behind you, if at all possible, not to make it busy. You certainly don't want a bedpost behind you. And for some people, their desktop at home is in their bedroom, master bedroom, and you see the bed behind them. As simple as that sounds, it's not good if you're interviewing. And if you have to use a virtual screen, and some of these applications will allow you to put a virtual screen behind you, pick something that's really simple, but it has to be on the bright side, but don't make it so overpowering that people are looking at the picture instead of you. So be careful using a virtual background. But again, a virtual background, a simple one, is better than a bedpost behind you. And that's assuming you can't. If you're using a laptop, then your laptop you could pick up and move to somewhere in the house. But you don't. You really want it to keep it, the interview focused on you and not what the picture has to say. I'm also a big fan, if you're doing a video interview, and keep it business casual. I wouldn't ask you to suit up, not in this environment at home, but business casual, with maybe a sports jacket, a dress shirt, or a dress blouse, pantsuit, top. Make sure you shave. That's a big one. It's okay to use hand gestures during a video conference. Lots of times you want to move. You don't want your face not to move ever. That's not a good thing on a video interview. You want to be able to smile. Many people I've coached, many people that I've seen on video interviews, there's a reluctance to smile. Make sure you smile. Make sure you move your hands. Show a little bit of who you are, your personality. That's really important. Some people have a hard time kind of just like looking at the screen. Now, if there's a picture there of somebody else, then you can look at the person talking. Sometimes I've had a couple of recent interviews where, they see you, but you can't see them. You just see their word, their name, John Smith. That can happen. But even in that case, I've asked people, to create a little picture of just, a stick figure and tape it behind the camera on their laptop or their desktop, and you could be looking at that as you're talking. because you're looking at something other than just the lens to the camera. So that's something else to consider. Let's see, virtual networking. I want to touch on virtual networking just for a minute. Virtual networking, you have to prep for virtual networking no different than a video interview. Do all the pre-work. Make sure all the applications are working. You don't want to be in a video interview, be part of the virtual networking forum with a group of other professionals, and then you can't log in. You're texting people. You can't be heard. You're not sure which buttons to push. It's not necessarily good representation of you as a professional, as part of any type of virtual networking forum. I've led no less than 3 or 4 large forums in the last 10 days. It's great to see when people have done their pre-work. And for those that don't, it also, I can see when that happens. But this whole thing of virtual networking is going like gangbusters now, because I used to, I had 6 or 7 speaking engagements canceled in the month of March. Many of them are shifting to April to a new format of getting people kind of in this virtual room and engaging. But a virtual networking is no different than face-to-face in this regard. You still have to bring an A game to that networking forum. Don't think just because you're at home you get to be just so casual, because the people that you're speaking to, these could be the people who are going to give you the next lead to help you to maybe they're even your potential next boss when they get back to work. Maybe the people on the call are working and they're on that virtual call and they're looking to hire people in the midst of everything that's going on. Maybe they're part of that defensive industry. So you got to be careful that you don't get too casual and that you do bring that A game to these virtual calls. The other thing that you have to do, these calls are no different than face-to-face calls. If you're given a lead, if you're given something where someone's going to help you, make sure at all costs you follow up on that lead. Even if you have to follow up with the moderator or the person facilitating to get that person's name and email or phone number somehow, so you make that follow-up. And just like face-to-face meetings, don't get so wrapped up in virtual networking that's where you spend all your time, because then it becomes counterproductive. I'm not a big fan of networking for networking's sake. Use your time wisely. A couple more areas. The hidden job market. Look, I'm a big fan of tapping into the hidden job market. But one thing that you need to do when you continue to tap into the hidden job market, you're reaching out to people that you may or may not know, potential hiring managers, but you always have to do a thermometer check in the environment that we're in right now. And that thermometer check is just making sure, hey, I hope you're doing okay. Hope you, your family are doing okay. Do not, and don't rationalize, well, they're in such a crisis, they're never going to pick up the phone. Well, they might be in a crisis, but they might need you. And I can just tell you, in the last couple of weeks, I've known 3 people who have gotten interviews, 1 person a job, simply because they tapped into the hidden job market in the midst of what's going on. And then there are other people who would never make the phone call simply because, well, they're in a crisis. I don't want to bother them. Well, again, you have to take the offensive in my mind, but you got to know what to say. That's a fact, and you got to be prepared. And let me close with a few things not to do. Don't ignore the fact that we're in the crisis. I think anybody who engages a potential hiring manager with the virus at hand, and potentially 240,000 Americans are going to die based on this virus, to not acknowledge it in an email, in a voicemail, in a live conversation, I think that your entire engagement begins and ends with a one giant dud. I think you have to state it, even if it's just for 10 seconds, 15, 30 seconds, and then move on with the conversation. But to ignore it, I think bodes very bad for you as a professional and as a human being in not acknowledging it in some way. Whatever you do, don't go into freeze mode. And stay focused on the task at hand. So we're just about out of time. Now, for those new to this program, I did publish my first book at the end of 2019 called Optimize Your Career, The Do's and Don'ts of Resumes, the Sam Nova Way. It's available on Amazon, on paperback, and Kindle. I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of positive comments from people who have read the book where they've actually found it helpful in some way. And in some cases, people have landed jobs. This is a great time if you're home, if you're not working now, to update and refresh that resume, to get it back into the fray. When this thing lifts, it's going to be competitive, no different than before, but even more so. And making that resume sharp is incredibly important. It's one of those important but not urgent tasks, perhaps for some of you. Even if you had your resume done a year ago and you're not working now, update it. Use this time. I encourage you to buy my book and go through it. It's a practical guide to getting your resume even at a better place. So let's close with, the next program is going to be on April 18th at 8 a.m. That will be the next Optimize Your Career program on Saturday. This is Ed Samuel, career coach with Sam Nova. Our website is www.samnovainc.com. Best thing to do is call our main number if you need any help at all at 610-274-8214. Again, 610-274-8214. Make it a great weekend, and God bless, and stay safe.